Hello, dear friends. I am absolutely thrilled to be with my great friend, Betty Kovacs, and beginning a discussion about her book, Merchants of Light, which is a book that has transformed my life and a book that I cannot recommend highly enough to you, because it's a book that explores the lost story of our origins and of our essential destiny on the earth, a story which Betty and I both believe that we have to remember at the deepest level now, if we are to take the opportunity that our tragic and terrible times are offering us of birthing a wholly new world. Betty, you began this book through a series of very extraordinary visionary experiences. And it would be wonderful if you could share with us the genesis of this masterpiece.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Well, I think about it a lot because there was a time in our lives, Ishvan, my husband's life, and mine, after our son was killed in an automobile accident, when we felt like we were in another dimension. It was during that time, so many things were happening. It felt like another dimension was open to us through his death. And I look back now when I think of the things that happened, and I'm more amazed than I was at the time because I was
Yes.
so deeply into it. But I'll go back a little bit in my life. I taught in college, I taught writing, and I taught mythology and symbolic language and comparative literature. And I loved working with students that age because they were so open and looking for meaning and purpose, if there is any, and what is it? And so it was a wonderful time to be working with students. And in reading the mythologies of the world, especially the Western world, we always found that there was an awareness within those symbolic stories of a consciousness that is beyond what we call ordinary consciousness. And so we talked about dreams and visions, and we honored the dream and the vision and the symbols that those dreams and visions reflected in myths and fairy tales. And we knew that the myth was embedded in cultural stories and in some stories about people, biographies, and the science of the day. But we always looked for that core symbolic myth that was reflective of a higher state of being, of which we are all possible, we are all capable of. And I used to say to the students at that time, I know that there is this higher consciousness, this cosmic consciousness. I know, or at least I believe that's who we are, but I haven't experienced that yet. But I had experienced, I felt a guiding a light throughout my life through the dreams. And after I finished my PhD in comparative literature and symbolic language, I thought, you know, I've had it with the left brain. I need to open up this right brain much, much more. So I went to Peru to
Mm.
work with shamans. And while I was there, I began to realize, no, it wasn't going to be a shaman outside of me that was going to open up anything for me, although I was grateful. And I realized that my education had been organized and structured by men in the Western world to whom I was deeply grateful, grateful for the opening up of the left brain and the honoring of our rational, reasoning, conceptual mind. But I needed something else. And I felt that my initiation with the masculine left brain that I had had and was grateful for, that I had to go, I had to have the feminine that would take me into that world. And in Peru, we went on the island of the sun. We went to a little place which was very sacred. In fact, we had to meditate for a long time until we got the signal from nature that we would be accepted to go in. And then we did. And when I was in there, all curled up like a fetus because it's so small, I simply said to myself, no longer am I following the dictates or even the teachings of the outside world. What I need now is something deep and profound within me. And I asked for the shamaness within me to guide me. And when I came home for 2 years after that, I really went deeper and deeper in meditation, using shamanic techniques to try to open myself up. But it really wasn't until our son, Pishti, at 20 years old, was in a car accident. It just happened that Ishvan and I were home at that time, strangely. And when we got the call, and he was in the trauma center for 13 days. And then it was clear that he wasn't going to make it. And we had made it clear with the doctor, who had been a trauma center nurse and was very sensitive to what was going on. We said, we do not want to keep him on the machines if he has no chance. Please take him off the machines when we know there is no chance for him to live and have a mind. And so the day came in which they gave the final test and they said, no, he will not make it. So we said, begin the death process. And as we were sitting in the room for them to do that, I knew it was exactly the day 1 year earlier that my mother had been hit by a car and killed instantly at exactly the same hour that they were taking him off the life support machines. And I thought, this is a strange synchronicity, that it would be exactly the hour when she was killed. And there were so many synchronicities happening at that time, but it was after his memorial, a week later, that Istvan and I began to feel his presence. Now, before I talk about that, I will jump back to when Pishti was almost 12 years old. And he would tell me his dreams. And one afternoon I was vacuuming the house and then he said, oh, Mommy, I just remember I had a big dream. So I turned off the vacuum cleaner, sat down, and he said, will you write it down? And so he told me the dream. I realized later he had not only written it down in his journal, but he had drawn it. And so he said, I was in a trauma center and I was up above the hospital looking down at my dead body. And he said, and then I was in a dark space for just a little while. And then I was on the other side and I was with other boys and it was in a horseshoe shape that we were standing. I was standing at the top of the horseshoe and there were 4 boys on my left and 4 boys on my right. In the center was an eternal fire. And on the other side, just opposite me, I saw an aura of the 10th boy. And we all knew when he arrived, it would be me and I would be complete because 10 is a number of completeness. I was kind of, I know that was such a, and after he died, Istvan asked him, what did you mean by that? And he said, I took my place, Dad. And Istvan kept saying that. And I said, well, Istvan, what else did he say? And Istvan said, he took his place. He was complete. And that's all I could get out of either one of them, except there was that sense of completeness once this had happened. And then in the year of his death, I was going to my college, he was going to go to his college, and I yelled down the hallway, would you like a cappuccino before you go? And he said yes. So I was making a cappuccino for both of us. And then he said, oh, Mom, I had a dream. And it was very interesting because he and I were in the same room together, and he had to crawl into the bed and pull the covers over him. And then he would get out of his body and go back outside, walk through the walls. And I said to him, are you afraid? And he said, no, I'm not afraid. I'm not a chicken. And he got in the bed again. And he said he pulled the covers over his head and it was like the light just shot in and shot him out of his body. And he said, I went so fast past suns and planets and moons that they popped as I passed by them. And he said, and then boom, he was back in his body. And so then I talked to him again about, you know, you can stay in your body if you choose, or if you choose, then please, when you go, be sure you take care of the body. I was telling him that in the dream, which is what I told him in the trauma center. You know, don't leave your body, you know, connected. Be sure that you let the body go. And if you choose to go, we let you go. But if you want to stay, you can come back whole and well. I don't know where that came from in me, but there it was. And it was interesting because later when we found the dream, I realized that is what I had said to him in the hospital. And this was the year before, or in the year that he died. And then there was a huge crash, and he was in the hospital and people were working with him. He said it was like a blue gown, a putty in a blue gown. They were working with him, that body. And finally a voice said, you know, let him go, let him go. And then he said, I kept going out into the universe and coming back, going out into the universe and coming back. And then he said, I looked down at that body and I realized that wasn't me. And I remember while I was making coffee, I took hold of his arm and I said, oh my God, thank heavens it wasn't you. Well, of course, you know, it was him, he realized it. But I said, well, Pishi, we don't have time to talk about it now, but we'll talk about it later. And I said, you know, let's do that. And he said, yes. I never thought of it again. It was totally out of my mind. And he never mentioned it. But after his death, we saw that he had written it down. And so I felt it was almost like a preparation, that he was doing a dress rehearsal, you know, of going out and coming back. And then I realized after his death that for 2 years, I had been dreaming of his death. And I would look at it, symbolically, and then, oh, it wasn't Pishti, it was my friend's son. And then I grieved for him. So I realized I had been grieving for 2 years on another deeper level. But I had looked at it symbolically. And also that dream, his last dream, had something very interesting in it other than just the death. In the dream, he said to me that he saw white candles burning everywhere. There were hundreds of white candles, and there was chanting. And he said, in the dream, he said to me, can you hear my chanting? Can you hear the chanting? And I said, yes, we can all hear your chanting in our sleep. So there was something going on in the very first vision that I had after his death, after the memorial, was chanting. It was the most incredible chanting coming out of the cosmos. And that's when I saw this spiral of beings spiraling down to be born on the earth to help us through this very difficult time when the earth was attempting to give birth to a new consciousness. And the people who were chanting, it was like Native American chanting, and I felt them say to me, our brothers and sisters on the earth are dreaming a terrible dream. And they had come to help us wake up, to realize it's a dream, it's a nightmare, that we don't have to create it this way. But then, to go back, Istvan also, and Istvan was not a person who paid much attention to his dreams or had visions until after Pishti's death, but he had a vision when he was in the office here at home working. And he said suddenly he saw Pishti's car on the side of the freeway. He saw his body superimposed on the car. And he said then to Pishti, which surprised him, oh, that's right, Pishti. It's almost time for you to do this. And that made him feel so bad. But then Pishti said to him, yes, Dad, that's right. I will be out of the house for a little while. Istvan completely went unconscious after that, and of that vision. He didn't tell me. It wasn't until the call came through that afternoon that he remembered the vision, and he was certain Pishti would die all along. He didn't tell me that because we had great hopes. And also his girlfriend was with us too. And she did so hope, that he would live. So Istvan didn't tell us until Pishti had died. And he said, I tried to hope that he could come through, but he said, I always had that vision and we didn't know what it meant. Yes, I will be out of the house for a little while, but he did come back after that week after his memorial. And we felt him. And we also were in deep conversation with him, sometimes for hours. It was just so intense.
How did the conversations take place? This is such an extraordinary story, Betty.
Well, yes. And I look back now and I see that it was. Now, it's an interesting thing. Jack Schwartz, who was, you know him, I'm sure, he was from Europe. He had tremendous abilities. And he had developed a kind of counseling, and I had gone there. It's amazing the things that he was capable of seeing in the person. And he would also say what color the auras were that we are born with. And I had purple and gold were the major ones. Pishti was so fascinated with him. He drove up there and he had a reading with him. And he also had purple and gold, but more gold than I did. And in one of the visions, Pishti said, Mom, we came with a similar energy field, auras, so that I could get through to you after I died. Now, we used shamanic techniques that I had learned in Peru. But there was so much that was just spontaneously happening. My husband said, on the way to work, I feel like it's a tape recorder going off, reminding me of all these things I've forgotten. And then I had heard music one time in a bookstore called Miracles. And I just was stunned by it. I took it home. I think Istvan was on a trip or working, and I put it on. Pishti had painted his room. He used to do that. He'd let it get pretty bad, then he'd take everything out and paint it because he did his artwork in there. And he put Susan Boulay, the shamanic paintings, just from a book. He pulled them out and put them on the wall. It was like a meditation room. So I put the music on in his room, and I was getting on my sweats. And suddenly the energy just pulled me into that room. As soon as I lay down, I felt Pishti in the upper right-hand corner. Not his image really, but just his energy. And in that time, he said, Mom, and this was not long after his death. And he said, Mom, let's go through all the stages of my life together. And so we would experience when he was baby and when he was little and when various things. We got to the teenage years and I said, you know what, Pishti, I can let those go. That's okay. I won't have, because we were surfing on the ocean of life. And he said, just flow with, go with the flow. Allow yourself to go with the flow and live each moment fully. Then let it go. And when we got to certain experiences, I just couldn't let it go. And I started to sink. And I would sink. And I realized you could absolutely be drowned by this if you didn't let it go, right, and ripped apart. And he would say, Mom, let it go. Flow with life, flow with the rhythm. And when I would let it go, I'd rise on the surface of the ocean. And I realized I could sail, I could create, I could do so much. And then we came to the time he was in the hospital. And when we took him off the final machine and we were there and I kissed him on the forehead, and then I stepped back. And then when I'm reliving it with Pishti, I thought, no, I can't let this go. I can't let this go. And I started to sink. And Pishti then said to me, Mother, remember Faust. Now, Pishti had not read Faust, I know that, but on the
other side, you've read everything.
Yeah, I guess so, because he said, remember when Faust said, linger this moment. Thou art so beautiful, that Mephistopheles had him.
Verschweile doch, du bist so schön, yeah.
Yeah, es ist so schön that you cannot let it go. And then it came back, live each moment fully, then let it go. And the music stopped exactly at that moment. That's the story. And that was a wonderful experience with him. Something I realized I was at such peace there was that message was in me to let it go. And yet it's all still within us because we have lived it fully. And I just, it was dark by that time. And I remember looking out at the night sky and how beautiful it was and just being in awe of the universe that I was with him. And it was interesting because in that last moment, I thought, no, I can't let him go. And then I said to myself, but wait a minute, here you are, he's dead. And you're with him, here you
Yes.
are together. And so, of course, you can let him go in the physical world because you're still with him. So that was,
That's the huge revelation that came out of this experience for you. Here you
yes.
were begging for your inner shamaness to appear on the island of the sun.
Yes.
Then you get what you have prayed for in the most extreme form. Your own son is killed, and yet he reveals to you that there is no death.
Yes.
There
Oh,
is
yes.
only eternal consciousness expressing itself in different forms of birth and death.
Exactly. And I did not know. I believed that, hoped that, but I could never believe. As Jung said, there are those of us who cannot believe that we must know. And that's the Gnostic experience that
And
we,
especially you, because you're very honest in your book about how trained you were in skepticism and radical denial of mystery.
well,
So that up to
absolutely.
that moment, there'd been experiences, but you'd been very astute and clever in denying them. Here was an
Yeah.
absolutely undeniable catastrophic event
Yeah.
that
Yeah, that
led
I
to
couldn't deny.
revelation,
I
right?
know that I couldn't deny. And,
That's right.
I went to the university because I wanted to know, is this heinous scientific worldview correct? That there's nothing but matter? There's no meaning, no purpose? And we can create meaning, we can love, and then when it's over, you're dead, you're dead. I thought it was so empty. So I thought the only way I had of trying to understand the world was to go to university. I did. And of course, I was overwhelmed with the scientific worldview. And yet I kept struggling, kept looking for something beyond that. So, but when Pishti died, I realized that in going to the university, I did not accept that the left brain was superior to all other brain components, as I was taught, this fiction of superiority, as we call it. And yet, when I was having these incredible experiences, I knew, and in the experience, when I then was not in that experience, my left brain popped up and decided, how can we get rid of this? This just isn't so. And it really revealed the brainwashing and the conditioning, the programming that I
Right.
had received in university with all the best will in the world from the people I studied with, to whom I'm deeply grateful. But nevertheless, this is our legacy, the brainwashing that this left brain is superior. And when you have these other experiences, it goes against everything it's been conditioned to believe.
Absolutely.
So you have to
But
kind of
this
enter.
experience that you had also initiated you into two things. It fundamentally gave you the eternal vision of all of the great sages and shamans of humanity, that there is, in the ultimate analysis, only consciousness playing with itself on every
And
level, a
exactly.
magical, eternal consciousness
Yes.
that appears in birth and appears in death, but never itself dies. That was the first revelation.
Yes.
And then the second revelation was more particular. It was about you. It was about your destiny at that stage in your life with this experience. And that destiny was to bring in this extraordinary vision that you brought in Merchants of Light for us at this particular moment of our human evolution. So do tell us the amazing story of how Pishti gave you the symbol of Anubis and the hexagram 18 and really started to infiltrate into your consciousness the message from that dimension that you were here to write a book called Merchants of Light. How did
Yes.
that take place?
Well, yes,
That's a
that.
fabulous, exciting story, and it's one of the most beautiful, truthful stories of revelatory initiation that I've ever read. So it would be
Well,
wonderful.
it was a tough one, of course, but mostly
Terrifying.
they
Yeah.
are. But before either Pishti or my mother or Ishtvan, my husband, was killed, I had a dream of Anubis. And I dreamed that I was in the Ashmolean Museum. And
Which I know well,
yeah,
yes.
I'm sure you do. And I went in and I wanted to look at some of the artifacts. And then I looked over and there was a jackal in sort of a human form, but with a jackal head. And he was sitting there in a deep state of meditation. And I thought, well, I won't disturb him. So I
Very
looked at
wise.
the artifacts, and then suddenly he was standing behind me, right by me. And he said, you can study the artifacts if you wish, but I can teach you everything you need to know.
Mm,
And I turned and looked at him and I said, who are you? And then there was this sort of opening up, and this voice said, the void, the all.
mm,
Well, I started looking up uh, more detail exactly the Egyptian symbolism of the jackal. And of course, the jackal is one who can take in decayed food. He eats the food just at the right moment of decay and takes it into his body and transforms it into new life.
right.
And I could see this would
And
be
he's the guide between dimensions too, life and
exactly.
death.
He's the
He's the one who
psychopomp.
knows the secret of the eternal consciousness and
He
guides people
does.
through to it, yes.
That's right. And he can take you. After Pishti's death, I had a vision in which I was in a pyramid and I saw only, he took me in and I saw only the flash of these incredibly beautiful colored paintings. And then I couldn't see it anymore, but I knew he was there. And I had from a woman who had bought this in Egypt, a small silver image of the jackal. And before that journey, I put that on for the journey, the necklace, but I put it on backwards. I didn't know it until after the journey. But when I saw this with the jackal, that I was in the pyramid, suddenly I felt I was lying down and Istvan was on the couch, music was going, he was meditating, I was lying down with my eyes closed, and I suddenly felt coming out of the east, the jackal, and I felt this
Mm,
pressure on my heart on that image of the jackal. He simply pressed it into my heart, that image of the jackal of Anubis. And the presence was so strong, I immediately sat up. And I thought Istvan had done that because obviously the energy was very precise. But no, he was in deep meditation. He didn't even know I had sat up. And I knew that, I guess we could put in the terms we would use, that the jackal had, I was initiated into that energy of the jackal,
and you
of
were, in a sense,
Anubis.
made into your own jackal, because that's
Yes,
part of what you had to do to
exactly.
write this book, to ingest all the dead matter and recreate it inside yourself to give us the living food that would help us reconnect with our eternal story.
And always when we say that you realize that this I is so interconnected
Oh, yes.
that nothing could be done without this community and all of us working together. But then later, Istvan had so many visions that just changed him. The very first one changed him. And he said, I know why Pishti and I can connect so well is that we are twin souls. He and I are born out of the same soul. I had had that experience earlier, but I was stunned when he said it. And he had experienced this like long tunnel of lives, and he saw their lives on both sides.
Mm,
Sometimes they, of many different races and ethnic groups. And he said, sometimes we were one, sometimes we were two. He said, when we were one, I knew what was happening. When we were two, Pishti talked to me about it.
mm,
And he said, we do this work in parallel worlds. He said, sometimes I die first and he stays.
mm.
And it was very interesting because he says we're like chemists. We're trying certain slight variations in one world to see how effective that can be. And so anyway, later, one time in a later vision with Pishti, he was in Peru. He'd never been there, but he was sitting on a mountain, he and Pishti together. And he said, Dad, look at that horizon. It's where the ocean met the sky.
Mm.
And he said, even that is not the limit of what we can create. Now, I was still in the place that immediately when Istvan told me that, I started creating all kinds of limits. I look back at that now and think, I couldn't believe that there is no limit to what we can create. But then on into the vision, he said, Dad, I want you to look up this hexagram in the I Ching. So after the vision, Istvan said to me, we do still have the I Ching, don't we? And I said, yes, but I'll have to look for it. I ran in, got it, ran back into the bedroom. And he said, okay, it's starting from the top down.
Hexagram 18, it's the working on what is decayed.
Exactly.
The link with Anubis, yes.
It's exactly, yes, because, and Anubis was in that vision too. He
Yes.
had then the vision of Anubis. And so, and he said, it's straight, broken, broken, straight, straight,
Right.
broken. And if you put those little pieces together, it's ML. And I said, because I said to him, well, how in the world did you remember out of the vision, straight, broken, broken, straight? And he said, oh, that's easy. It's merchants of light. And they are here. They are on the earth. They are working with us to bring about this new consciousness. They are the merchants of light, miracle workers, masters of love, masters of life, and masters of light. And on and on. I said, there's so many things, mother love, matrix of life. And so I looked it up, and there it was, as you've said, 18, work on what has decayed. And I was so stunned when I saw that it was the theme that he had had in his vision. I mean, when something like that happens, you know that
you cannot avoid it. There it is, staring at you. Your task, your mission, your vision. Yes.
Yes. And Pishti said to his dad, Dad, read this hexagram carefully. He said, you and Mom, because it is your work. And then he said, and it is the work of the earth. This is the work of the earth now, to work on what has decayed. So Istvan, in that vision, he said, when he talked about parallel worlds, he said, sometimes I go first, sometimes he does, but you are the one who always stays to write about ML. And I said, what do you mean? That kind of scared me. And I can't remember how he explained it, that I somehow accepted it. But of course, when he was killed, then I remembered that he had said, I'm the one who always stays. But I wrote the first book, Miracle of Death. I wrote about all of the visions and experiences we had.
It's an amazing book.
And then I was ready to write the other one, but I didn't know exactly, I didn't exactly have my direction, and I thought,
you had the order, you had the connection with the old story that needed renovation. You had the guide of Anubis, you had the hexagram, you had the merchants of light, but you didn't have yet the way in. How did that way in emerge?
Well, it's interesting, that you can have all these things and still be kind of cloudy.
Oh, yes. But that's part of it, isn't it? Because how you clear the cloud is how we will clear the cloud.
And it's interesting because I thought, well, I'll just throw the I Ching. I'll just throw it and see what happens, what I should do, how I should go with this. And can you believe it? I got the 18th hexagram.
Yes, I can.
Work on what has decayed. And I thought, okay, I can't deny that. So, but I didn't know well, anyway, I began, and I had taught, of course, mythology, had taught so much of this, but there was so much I didn't know. And so I began doing the research, but I did feel all along the way that I was learning each step of the way, but I also knew I was working with the community, of merchants.
You were learning, but you were also remembering, and you were also being guided and helped in your research.
Yes.
That's what I got from the book, that what you needed appeared in exactly the constellations that you needed, which is why in the book you've been able to reconstruct our lost story from the very beginning with such clarity, rescuing the important parts of this glowing story of our destiny in all of the different stages of our evolutionary unfolding.
Yes, and to see, as I did the research, and as you know from Merchants of Light, I talk about these cultures in which that was the most natural thing.
Right.
Is discovering the vastness of who we are, experiencing it, from the cave cultures to the sand bushmen to the Egyptian, the high order of that knowledge and wisdom in Egypt. And
to the first temple mysteries, to the Nag Hammadi Jesus, to these four periods in the modern age where it came about, the 11th to the 13th century, the Renaissance, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, all of these moments when the story emerges afresh to inspire us.
Yes, and how I organize it in the book is that from the cave cultures, the sand bushmen, old Europe, which was very much aware of this consciousness, into Egyptian First Temple Judaism, and then thank God for Peter Kingsley's work in the pre-Socratic philosophers,
Right.
how we did not know they were shamans, highly developed shamans and healers and diplomats and ambassadors and inventors.
And scientists, because that's one of the most
Scientists.
revealing and extraordinary parts of your book, is when
Yes.
you show again and again how what we think of as scientific logic and clarity about processes was not separate from visionary understanding,
And
in fact,
no,
engendered by it.
and it's as though, how could it be that when
How
we
could it be?
experience reality, of course there's a part of us that will want to understand it scientifically. And I
Right.
love in the megalithic period, which I didn't mention, and Keith Critchlow talks so beautifully about how at that time, obviously they had mathematics, they were able to develop these temples, observatories that would show us the rhythms of the cosmos. But he said, this is the thing that's so important, is that they had an intuition that was so powerful that it's probably hard for us to even imagine it. And why was that? It's because I think that all of these brain components worked together. And
Right.
when they do, that knowingness does not have to go step by step through conceptual logic. It is simply there. And that is what these shaman scientists knew in the megalithic period. And of course, any time they could get to that point, the scientists were part of the mystical tradition. Yes. And then when the church came into power, it was over 700 years. We didn't know about this, the majority of people. And then it was reborn in these 5 waves that you're talking about: the High Middle Ages, the Italian Renaissance, the Rosicrucian Renaissance, the German Romantic and English, but especially the German, because it was rooted there. They were rejecting this singularity of knowledge that the Enlightenment philosophers in France had talked about. No, they knew better. And now in our time, it has come back.
In quantum physics and in the great
Yeah,
shamanic mystical revival that's happening in our time, and in the
exactly.
explosion of these phenomena that you're talking about, the Kundalini eruption, UFOs, all of these signs that we are being invited to completely reimagine who we essentially are, which we must do, because if we don't, it's quite clear now that we're going to destroy our planet.
It's this 5th wave really is it, we might say. And it's very interesting, and I've talked about this in the book, is that this shaman mystic tradition in Judaism was destroyed by the Deuteronomist, and we're grateful for Margaret Barker's work in this. She's done incredible research into this.
Destroyed really in 621 BC by Josiah, who decided to eliminate all traces of the feminine side of God.
It's just she was wisdom
Right.
literature. And of course, other Jews left that area and went to Egypt and took the wisdom tradition with them. But of course, that tradition in Judaism was lost. And not only that, I think that the stories that they inverted have thwarted our evolution.
Well, you point this out very distinctly in the way in which we've misinterpreted the full story. That here Eve is the enemy, the serpent is the enemy, whereas in fact, and I imagine what would have been the original story, Eve is the heroine of a new form of knowledge, the serpent is the bestower of a new form of knowledge and freedom that allows for a much greater vision of who we are and a much greater possibility of evolution.
Well, this is absolutely correct, is that in Sumer, long before 621, I think 2500 BCE, the images on seals of the tree were of the fruit hanging from the tree, the goddess and the god holding their hands out like, take, it's for you.
Take, eat of this tree. And the symbol of the goddess is the serpent. So the serpent energy, the Kundalini energy, is the initiatory energy that enables us to taste these gorgeous golden fruits and be divinized by that taste.
Yes, because that fruit would activate the Kundalini energy with the serpent. And in Egypt, later we see so many images of the tree. And the tree is the feminine.
Right.
The trunk becomes the female body, and she is handing out the fruit to the people who are ready and willing to take it. But what I felt so strongly is that in 621, the Deuteronomist inverted many of the stories that were stories that carried the blueprint for our development. These were thwarted, inverted, and we lived with these negative, horrible stories of
And they were taken up later by the church, who did their
precisely.
own business of destroying the secret, rich mystery roots of Christianity.
Yes, which thwarted the blueprint, destroyed the blueprint of our evolution, which these stories and our myths and our fairy tales and our dreams carry. And it's they also, Margaret Barker makes very clear that Jesus, the Jesus story, the Jesus tradition in Judaism is an attempt on the part of the Jews to recreate the first temple shaman mystic tradition. Jesus was the shaman mystic. And then, of course, he was taken over, that tradition was taken over. But for the early period of Christianity, Jesus taught a hidden tradition. The,
Absolutely. But this, I think let's concentrate for the last part of our talk together on a very crucial aspect of your book, which happens to be a great passion of mine. So this is one of the many places where we come together. The real Jesus was a shaman, mystic, tantric, someone who lived in unified passion with the whole of reality. The real Jesus embraced the feminine in himself and in the creation and in the world. The real Jesus had a mystical consort who was also potentially a physical consort, maybe his wife, Mary Magdalene. And it's the real Jesus that we've had the extraordinary grace to rediscover in the Nag Hammadi library, which was rediscovered in 1945 at the very moment when our wrong story was driving us to drop bombs Nagasaki and Hiroshima and to engender horrific violence. So what is the significance of that Nag Hammadi discovery for you, and the rediscovery potentially of the real Jesus and the rewriting of our own essential myth through that?
Yes, well, we know, again, through scholars' research and very much through Margaret Barker's, that this hidden tradition that Jesus taught, obviously, is the shaman mystic tradition to go within. And in, of course, as you say beautifully, the church took that distorted image and they made Jesus uh, someone you should follow. You obey him. And that's not the point at all. In the Nag Hammadi text, Jesus said, when you drink from my mouth,
You
you
will
and
be
I
healed.
are one. And if you bring forth what is within you, it will heal you. What is within you, not following someone else. And he says, I did not come to save you. I came to remind you of who you are, each one of us. And so this is the power and the beauty of the Nag Hammadi text, found right after the World War II, when we'd been living out the distorted vision of ourselves uh, as as we had been taught that we are nothing. And here then appears in 1945, when we need it the most, the Nag Hammadi vision of the Jesus, the Christ. Do not follow me, become the Christ.
Drink
That,
from my mouth. Drink at
yes,
the same source that I've drunk from.
yes.
It's still on my mouth. I will be able to communicate it to you so that you become who you are meant to be, living Christs, with this
And
astonishing understanding of eternal consciousness and with the astonishing powers that he represented in his miracles, etc. Not as a desire to be, not out of a desire to be worshipped, but out of a desire to show us what we could be if we claimed who we really were.
yes, to give birth to
To,
that consciousness that we are all living in. We are born in universal mind and universal consciousness, but we have this valve in the brain that allows us to reduce it to a stream so that we can, buy the groceries and and live
Right.
this particular. But we must always know how to release that valve and live in the knowledge of universal mind or Christ consciousness. And this was when we regained our blueprint in the Nag Hammadi text. I don't know how many people who belong to the religions of the West who know about the Nag Hammadi text or teach this new Jesus. I haven't met anyone. I'm sure that
I
certainly
do.
in
That's what I've
mystical
been
Christian,
teaching.
yeah,
Yes.
in mystical Christianity,
Yes.
esoteric Christianity, it certainly is, and the same with
I
esoteric
think it's the key
Judaism.
because just as the false Jesus has been at the source of our wrong story, so the real Jesus is at the source of our real story. That's the astounding possibility opened up by the Nag Hammadi.
It is, but it definitely is. I wish that more of the denominations knew
Mm,
about it. I know of two
absolutely.
people who were really tragically wounded in life and joined one a Catholic church, one a Protestant church. And in the Protestant church, the person was taught that the visions that she had had were not true. They were of the devil. You cannot take any vision you have within. The devil is very clever. The devil will trick you, even when these visions are very healing. No, you have to follow what the church teaches,
This is
and it's a
insane.
way of robbing wonderful people of their ability to be the Christ, to be Christ consciousness. Of course, that they can't even bear to hear that, because that seems blasphemous to say
Well,
that
it
we can
destroys their
experience.
power. Their
Yes,
power is invested in being intermediaries of the Christ
exactly,
consciousness.
exactly.
So
And
they
so
put,
I think that's a real problem too. We
yes.
have mystic Christianity, which is the tradition that Jesus taught, but I wish it could be revealed and experienced by more people within the churches. They're wonderful people, many of these people, and do so want to uh, be a part of.
But they'll have to break
Mhm.
through that
Yeah,
fundamental idolatrousness that has
yes,
been institutionalized. They'll have to realize that Jesus came not to be worshipped, but to
yes.
reveal themselves to themselves. That's
But
what they'll have to realize.
this is absolutely blasphemous within the church. But
Yes.
hopefully that will change. But I think that to go back to the merchants of light is that this is an energy field as well, that it is that highly organizing energy that if we bring it, draw it to ourselves, it's the energy that transforms us. It is the imaginal cells, we might say, that cluster together and form a new being out of the decayed old being that it.
Absolutely.
And so
How when somebody comes to you and says, "You've written this book, Merchants of Light," what would be your dream reader? How would you like people to read this extraordinary book? What would you advise them to prepare themselves for?
well, I'd like readers like you, Andrew. that,
Well,
that would
I'm
be great.
here.
But I just, I think the important thing for us to know is who we are, to get a glimpse that each one of us is living in and born out of this loving heart Christ consciousness. I would like them to know that. And I would also like them to know that the deep civilizations, let's put it that way, or the deep cultures, were those cultures that that rather naturally discovered the next step in our awakening, and they did participate in that awakening and had peaceful societies. And that if we could see, this is not, as I said in one interview, this what we call esotericism. It's not, it shouldn't be esoteric so much. This is our history. It's not a sidebar to history.
Right.
This
This is
is
our essential history.
this
And
is
this is
yes.
guaranteed creativity, joy, celebration, peace, harmony at really important moments in human history.
Yes, and that if we could realize, and if you ask as a reader of the book, I would like to have made clear that there were those who had forgotten who they are, who then wanted to have since they did not have that inner beingness themselves, they wanted to control the outer world and rule it. And they absolutely thwarted our evolution. That we were brought up in the West with some of the most heinous stories. We did get the story of Jesus as a beautiful human being, and that was a very positive thing. But we didn't get the story that's who we can be. That is our destiny. That is our evolutionary possibility. And to realize that this kind of world that we've created, this violent, addictive, uh, fanatic world that we live in, is not the world that we would create if we knew who we are. And to realize that each person, I don't care what we've done, once we have that consciousness that we are, as our ancestors wanted this legacy to be known, we are immortal. We do not die. Consciousness is primary. And when matter is gone, consciousness is present still. And that we are immortal, creative, and that we are all divine. We are all divine. And we have that potential to awaken to that. And that I want to then say, and I didn't focus on it this much in the book, but we need to focus on our children. How do we educate our children?
Right.
And in one of the groups that Kim and I have online of talking about inner experiences that people have had, last time they told us about this Inspiring Children University. And I think it's in the UK, where they are teaching the children, they blindfold them and teach them to see with their third eye. And or they can even put their hand on something and know what's in it. And I think that we have so many abilities that we are not awakening in ourselves or in our children. And I love this because they are really awakening these abilities early on. And also, I want to say that Ishvan had one of the visions that he had was of just universes creating themselves, dissolving themselves, of people coming into being, of loving, of creating. And he said, and I realized I was everything. I was the one looking at it. I was the universe. I was the creating and the destructing. And he said, I understood it. I had the mind of a physicist. And he said, and Pishti reminded him, Dad, you won't have this when you get back, but you'll remember that you had it. But then at the end, he said, I saw that the children, the new children, are coming with a new spiral of the DNA or new circles of the DNA. And he said, I don't know what that means. Maybe it was just symbolic, but he said, I felt that if we can do the work we have come to do today, that they will be born knowing that. And then it's interesting because Istvan, in his first vision, suddenly became aware that there was an incredible feminine being present, but she was like everything, the all. And she talked, he said, I didn't realize you've been with us the entire time. Yes, she had. And she even gave him her name, Syra. In Hungarian, it would be Shira. And she was always present then. And then she was present in my visions. And one time I said to Pishti, I'm having trouble with this. She's so vast and so loving. And he said, Mom, her body stretches over galaxies. And I thought that was strange. And I thought, well, maybe my mind just came up with that. But I was reading later, years later, Mary Rodwell's The New Human. And in that, these children, first of all, they state very clearly that they have new circles of the DNA are awakened in them. So Ishvan's vision was right on, and that they have come to help to awaken that in us. And then the person talking about coming from this vast consciousness, and I think I have it here, it just startled me. So it said, I cannot describe as enormous. I can describe these beings as enormous bodies of immense light, geometric, crystalline, and holographic in nature when expressing a visible form. These energies or beings were shown to be collectively spanning solar systems and galaxies and galaxies. So this being, I don't try to define her. She was certainly cosmic, loving, and so highly cosmic from the heart of consciousness. But I was so startled to see years later, here are these children with these new consciousness that are saying, the beings that I came from, they're, if we could even speak of bodies, they cover solar systems and galaxies. So I think there's just so much vastness we don't know yet, but we do know we're participating within it and we can become it.
The more we learn our real story, which is what you've so magisterially and brilliantly laid out for us in Merchants of Light, the more we understand that this message of being one with eternal consciousness is the birthright that we must claim, the more that we participate in the new discoveries of quantum physics with joy and celebration that reveal a participatory universe, the more we discover the kind of creativity that can build a new world out of the smoldering ashes of the old.
I think so. And I think that it will awaken. We have a tremendous percentage of DNA we're not using, and we can bring those frequencies in that will awaken that DNA. But I want to so stress what is just flooding in on me in the last month is that our children need our attention. When we know what has happened in Yemen, for example, with these children and with children all over the world. I once had a very short vision. It was a shamanic vision, and it was geometric. It was just geometric forms. But through those geometric forms came this incredible awareness. It was out of the earth, not of the earth consciousness, communicating to me through feeling how we treat our children. And it was about the children of the earth, what we are doing to these children. These are our future, and they need our care and nurturing and consciousness to guide them so this can awaken in them. And it was as though the cosmos was incredibly in grief at the way we treat our children.
To become midwives, though, we have to know our story.
That's true.
And that's why you wrote Merchants of Light, to
Mhm.
teach us our story, to help us become birthers in our children and in all those we meet of
That's
the
right.
possibilities of this new story.
That's true. We can't do it until we experience it. And once
Right.
we know it, we can experience, we can help the children to know it. And many of these children are coming already knowing it, which is, but there're just so many children who need the knowingness that we are bringing into our own consciousness. We need to be able to create a field in which they can experience it as well.
Betty, always a great joy to speak to you, and thank you for this astounding book. And anybody who's been following this conversation and has been inspired by it, please, please go out and buy this book and read it, not just once. I've read it many, many times. It's accompanied me through many different turns of my own consciousness. And you'll find in it one of the very few books written in the last 30 years that truly offers us our real identity and astonishing forces of hope and creativity that could come from it. I'm so grateful for your amazing work, and I cannot thank you enough.
And I'm grateful for you. I thank you so much. You know, Goethe had said that when you share an image with someone, it becomes much more intense. And I feel that has happened with you. You know, in sharing these images with you, the image itself becomes more powerful.
Thank you. What a lovely thing to say. Isn't that the dance of collaboration we're all invited to, though?
Exactly. Exactly.